Have you ever felt like something was deeply wrong, but you couldn't explain it? Like you were trapped in an invisible game? A game you never agreed to play, yet somehow you kept losing anyway. At first, everything felt magnetic, electric, almost spiritual. She saw you, admired you, made you feel like the only man in the room. And that feeling, it was intoxicating. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the energy shifted. Her warmth turned into coldness. Her affection became distance. Her sweetness transformed into subtle punishments, silence, withdrawal, confusion. And you couldn't understand why. The more you tried to fix it, the worse it got. The more you gave, the more it was never enough. You felt yourself shrinking, doubting your own mind, negotiating with red flags and abandoning your own boundaries just to feel chosen again, even for a moment. What if I told you this wasn't an accident? What if I told you this is a psychological pattern so ancient, so universal, that Carl Jung himself devoted his life to exposing it? A dark truth about women that most men will never be told, until it's too late. In this video, we're going to strip away every illusion. You'll finally understand why certain women leave you drained, confused, and broken, not because of who you are, but because of the unconscious dynamics you were never taught to see. Once you see it, the spell breaks, and your life will never be the same again. The invisible game, how the shadow feminine controls without words. Carl Jung dedicated his entire life to uncovering the hidden forces that shape human behavior, forces that operate far beneath the surface of what we see, say, or even consciously believe. And among those forces, few are more misunderstood and more dangerous than the shadow side of the feminine. This isn't about women in general. It's about a particular psychological pattern that lives deep within the unconscious, both in women and in men who unconsciously respond to it. This is the pattern of control without force, domination without confrontation, power without ever having to raise a voice. And here's what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't look like control. It looks like connection, like chemistry, like intensity. It starts with attention, a kind of focus that feels intoxicating. She mirrors you, reflects you, makes you feel like you've finally found someone who truly understands you, not just on the surface, but at a soul level. You feel seen, admired, elevated. The dopamine hits are real. Your nervous system starts to associate her presence with validation, security, and even meaning. But soon, subtly, quietly, the rules begin to change. The warmth you once felt becomes inconsistent. The attention turns into silence. The admiration shifts into subtle criticism or emotional distance. You can't quite put your finger on it, but something feels off. And yet, you stay. You justify it. You tell yourself it's normal. She's stressed. She's complicated. Maybe it's me. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe if I just show more love, more patience, more understanding. This is how the game works. Not by force, but by inversion. She never has to ask for control. You willingly hand it over, in tiny, unnoticed increments, just to get back the version of her you met in the beginning. You start filtering your words, shrinking your truth, avoiding certain topics. You begin walking on eggshells, not because you're afraid of being yelled at, but because you're afraid of the withdrawal, the coldness, the sudden emptiness in her eyes that communicates more than any argument ever could. You disappointed me. You failed the test. You are no longer worthy of my warmth. And that emptiness hurts more than any fight ever could, because the withdrawal of affection, of presence, triggers something primal, something ancient, something that goes straight to the core of the masculine psyche. the need to be respected, valued, and seen. But here's the most disturbing part. The real game isn't between you and her, it's between you and yourself. Because the moment you start betraying your own boundaries, ignoring your own intuition, and negotiating with your own truth, you lose. Not to her, but to the shadow. And this is exactly what Jung warned about. When the shadow is not recognized, it doesn't disappear. It rules you, quietly, invisibly. From the dark corners of the unconscious, most men think they're dealing with relationship problems. They believe if they communicate better, show more empathy, become less reactive, everything will return to how it was. But what they don't realize is that the problem isn't surface level. It's structural, psychological, archetypal. This isn't a bad relationship. It's an unconscious power dynamic. And until you see the game, until you name it, you are destined to play it. Over and over and over again. The question is, how much of yourself are you willing to lose? Just to feel chosen by someone whose love is conditional? Why men keep falling for the same woman without realizing? There's a brutal truth that few men ever fully understand until it's too late. You don't just fall for her. You fall for the story your unconscious creates around her. The story that says, this is the one. She's different. She's special. She completes me. And this is exactly how the trap begins, not because of who she is, but because of the unresolved parts inside of you that silently respond to her. Carl Jung's work revealed something most men go their entire lives ignoring. What feels like attraction is often not attraction. What feels like chemistry is not always love. In many cases, it's the unconscious recognizing a familiar wound. A wound wrapped in the perfect disguise of feminine beauty, charm, mystery, and emotional volatility. This is why you've probably noticed something strange in your own life. You keep falling for the same woman. She looks different, speaks differently, has a different face, a different voice, a different background. But within a few weeks or months, the pattern repeats. The same confusion, the same withdrawal, the same feeling of walking on eggshells, the same sensation of trying to win back the version of her that only existed at the very beginning. This is not random. This is not bad luck. This is psychology. Deep, archetypal, shadow-driven psychology. The unhealed masculine, the man disconnected from his own center, his own boundaries, his own self-worth, is highly susceptible to the feminine shadow, especially when that shadow presents itself not as chaos, but as allure, as seduction, as magnetic emotional intensity disguised as love. Because here's the terrifying part Jung understood better than anyone. The unconscious seeks completion, always. If there are parts of you, your self-worth, your boundaries, your sense of sovereignty, that were broken, ignored, or never fully developed, the unconscious looks for someone to complete the story. And it often finds it in the woman whose very pattern triggers those missing pieces. She becomes the puzzle piece that almost fits. Almost, but never fully, never sustainably. And that's the hook. Because the masculine psyche, when wounded, believes that if it just solves the puzzle, if it can just say the right thing, do the right thing, become the right man, then she will finally give the love, the consistency, the validation that has been dangled like a carrot since the beginning. But here's the brutal truth. The game was never designed to be won, because it's not actually about her. It's about your own psyche trying to finish a story that cannot be finished through another person. This is why the same cycle keeps happening. Different women, same pattern. Different faces, Same confusion, different beginnings, same devastating endings. It's not her fault, and it's not yours either. It's the unconscious running your life until you decide to wake up. Jung's entire body of work points to one simple, liberating truth. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. Most men call it bad luck. Some call it heartbreak. Others call it, all women are like this. None of those are true. The truth is simpler and harder. It's not fate. It's a pattern. And patterns break the moment you see them clearly for what they are. The real question isn't why she keeps doing this. The real question is, why do you keep abandoning yourself to chase what was never real? The moment the spell breaks, there comes a moment, not always loud, not always dramatic, when the fog starts to lift. A quiet realization settles in, a voice, almost a whisper that says, "This is not love. This is a pattern, and I am done betraying myself for it." It's in that moment you finally see her not as the fantasy your unconscious created, but as a mirror, a reflection of everything you ignored within yourself. Your neglected boundaries, your suppressed needs, your forgotten worth. And once you see it, truly see it, the spell starts to break. The things that once pulled you in, her silence, her mood swings, her unpredictable affection, lose their grip. You stop craving her approval. You stop negotiating with chaos. You stop thinking that being chosen is the same as being valued. Because now you see the game for what it is. A psychological loop. A dance between her shadow and yours. A cycle designed not to be solved, but to be escaped. But escaping is only the beginning. Because what most men don't realize is that the real work isn't about avoiding her. It's about facing yourself, rebuilding the parts of you that were shattered in the process, learning how to silence the mental chaos, reclaim your clarity, and reconnect with the man you were before the confusion. That's exactly why I created the SIM method. A simple daily practice designed to break mental loops, integrate your shadow, and protect your mind from these patterns. Just 5 minutes a day. The link is waiting for you in the pinned comment below. Because the real power isn't in changing her. It's in changing what you tolerate. It's in changing the parts of you that ever believed this was love. Why her chaos feels like chemistry. If there's one brutal lie that traps men in these cycles over and over again, it's this: the belief that chaos, unpredictability, and emotional volatility are signs of passion, signs of real love, signs of a connection that is rare, intense, and meant to be. It's not. It never was. What you're feeling is not love. It's nervous system dysregulation being mistaken for chemistry. Carl Jung understood this at a level most modern psychology still refuses to admit. When your unconscious meets someone whose patterns mirror your unresolved wounds, someone whose instability matches your unhealed need for validation, approval, or to be the one who finally fixes someone, it triggers not love, but survival responses. This is why you feel the butterflies, the tension, the hyperfocus, the endless overthinking of what to say, what to do, how to avoid the next emotional withdrawal. Your body starts producing cortisol, adrenaline, and dopamine all at once. A biochemical cocktail that creates the illusion of deep attraction, of magnetic connection. But it's not love. It's an addiction to instability. It's the nervous system confusing unpredictability with importance. The more she pulls away, the more dopamine your brain releases, convincing you that if you could just win her back, the reward would finally come. But the reward never comes. Or if it does, it's temporary. A breadcrumb of affection, a brief return to the version of her that existed in the beginning. just enough to hook you deeper before the cycle starts again. This is the real danger of the feminine shadow. It doesn't destroy you by attacking you. It destroys you by making you willingly self-abandon, by seducing you into believing that this is what love is supposed to feel like. Tension, guessing, waiting, proving. And the longer you believe that, the more you become addicted to the very dynamic that is draining you. Because here's the truth Jung knew. The masculine that has not yet become sovereign, fully rooted in himself, his boundaries, his inner clarity, will always confuse anxiety for desire. And until you break that association, you will continue to fall for the same woman. Again, and again, and again. The hidden cost. No one talks about. When you finally step out of the chaos, when the fog starts to lift, you realize something far more devastating than the heartbreak itself. The cost wasn't just the relationship. The cost was you. Pieces of yourself you didn't even realize you gave away. Your peace, your clarity, your focus, your self-respect, your confidence, your energy, slowly bled out over months, maybe years, in the quiet, desperate hope that if you just loved harder, tried more, proved yourself enough, it would finally work. But it never did, and it was never designed to. This is the part no one talks about. It's not just the time you lost. It's not just the money, the energy, the sleep, or the opportunities. It's the fact that for so long you forgot how it feels to be fully yourself, to trust your own mind, to trust your own perception of reality, because the real damage isn't what she did. It's what you did to yourself. The 1,000 little moments where you felt the discomfort and ignored it. The boundary you knew you needed to set and didn't. The truth you felt in your gut and silenced. This is how the feminine shadow operates at its most dangerous level, not by direct harm, but by seducing you into willingly participating in your own erosion. And what's worse, most men never fully recover, not because they can't, but because they don't know how. Because no one taught them that the real healing isn't about moving on from her. It's about moving back into themselves. It's about learning how to clear the noise, rebuild their inner clarity, and finally break free from the unconscious patterns that made this dynamic possible in the first place. Because until you do, the next woman will be the same. Different face, same chaos, different voice, same pattern. The hidden cost of ignoring this isn't just the loss of love. It's the slow, silent loss of yourself. The real enemy was never her. It was the parts of you that betrayed yourself. There is a moment, often quiet and unsettling, when the question finally changes. It stops being about her. What she did, what she said, how she pulled away, how she shifted from love to coldness, from admiration to silent punishment. That question dies. And what replaces it is far more disturbing and far more liberating. Why did I abandon myself to be chosen? This is the question that most men never ask, because it's the question that burns. The question that forces you to look not at her, not at what went wrong out there, but at the exact moment where you betrayed your own intuition, your own boundaries, your own worth, and called it love. Because the real enemy was never her. It was never the unpredictable texts, the sudden silence, the cold looks, the confusing shifts from intimacy to withdrawal. Those were symptoms, expressions of a dynamic that could never have existed without your participation, without the version of you that, at some point, decided that being chosen was worth more than being true to yourself. And this is the core of the masculine wound, the part of the psyche that Jung understood better than anyone, the part that believes love must be earned, that affection is conditional, that presence, stability, and being valued are rewards, not birthrights. This wound doesn't begin in adulthood. It's planted early, sometimes by a father who was emotionally absent, sometimes by a mother whose love was unpredictable, whose moods were unstable, whose affection came with invisible contracts. Be good and I'll love you. Meet my emotional needs and I'll stay present. Disappoint me and I'll disappear. And the boy learns. He learns to monitor the room, to read emotions, to shapeshift, to become whoever he needs to be to maintain peace, to preserve connection at any cost. He learns that being chosen feels like safety, and that losing approval feels like death. Fast forward 20, 30 years. The faces change, the rooms change, the dynamic doesn't, because the boy never left. He just put on the body of a man who now finds himself irresistibly drawn to the exact type of woman whose shadow mirrors his wound perfectly. The unpredictable, emotionally volatile, chaotic feminine. And here's the cruel joke of the unconscious. It's familiar. It feels like home. Not because it's love, but because it matches the nervous system's blueprint for survival. A blueprint that says, if I can just be good enough, stable enough, patient enough, she'll stay. She'll love me. She won't withdraw. But the blueprint is a lie written in the language of the wounded inner child, a child who doesn't yet know that the real danger was never her leaving. It was him leaving himself. This is why the pain runs so deep, because it's not just heartbreak. It's not just disappointment. It's the grief of realizing how many times you silenced yourself, minimized your needs, betrayed your boundaries, just to not feel abandoned. And this is the point where most men either collapse or wake up. Collapse looks like bitterness, like deciding all women are like this, like falling into endless cycles of numbing, porn, alcohol, distractions, shallow connections, anything to avoid feeling the brutal emptiness of self-abandonment. Waking up looks very different. Waking up is realizing that the real battlefield was never out there. It was always internal. The battle between the man you were born to be and the scared boy who learned to survive by shrinking. Waking up is the moment you realize that her silence was never the enemy. Her withdrawal was never the enemy. Her chaos, her volatility, her unpredictable affection. None of it was the problem. The problem was that you believed you had to earn consistency, that you had to buy love with self-sacrifice. And when you see this, not just intellectually but viscerally, something fractures, something collapses. The old story, the old contract, the old lie that said your worth is measured by your ability to be what someone else needs you to be. The truth replaces it, a simple truth, a hard truth. I do not negotiate my dignity, not for love, not for approval, not for anyone. And this is where the game ends. Because the masculine man, the integrated man, the sovereign man, no longer chases unpredictable women. He no longer mistakes anxiety for chemistry. He no longer interprets chaos as passion. He knows what love is and what it is not. Love is not eggshells. Love is not decoding mixed signals. Love is not managing someone else's emotional instability to avoid punishment. Love is not self-abandonment dressed up as devotion. Love is clarity. Love is mutual respect. Love is consistency, not perfection, but a willingness to show up, stay present, and communicate without the use of psychological warfare. And the man who has reclaimed his center only allows into his life what matches that. Not because he's closed off, not because he's bitter, but because he finally understands that the highest form of love starts with himself. Because here's the final truth Jung would whisper if he was sitting across from you. You were never here to fix her. You were never here to earn her love. You were here to remember. You are already whole. And when you finally see that, the kind of women who used to drain you, confuse you, consume you, they lose all power. You don't attract them anymore. Or if you do, you see the game within seconds. You smile, you nod, and you walk away. No anger, no bitterness, no resentment, just clarity. Because the spell is broken, the boy is gone, the man is home. When you become unreachable to the wrong woman, there is a transformation that happens. Not overnight, not instantly, but slowly, steadily, through the fire of clarity, where you become something entirely different from the man you used to be. You become unreachable, not physically, not emotionally, but psychologically, spiritually, energetically unreachable to the type of woman who once had the power to hijack your mind, fracture your peace, and leave you questioning your own reality. And the first thing you realize in this state is something that almost feels surreal. You were never actually addicted to her. You were addicted to the version of yourself that showed up in her presence, the version of yourself that was constantly trying to prove, impress, decode, stabilize, repair, rescue. You didn't love her. You loved the fantasy, the potential, the illusion of what it could be. If only you worked hard enough to keep the chaos from swallowing everything whole. But now, the man you've become, the one who knows his own value, who no longer negotiates his boundaries, who no longer mistakes intensity for intimacy, becomes immune. She can't reach him. Her silence doesn't hook him. Her withdrawal doesn't destabilize him. Her mood swings don't activate him. Her mixed signals don't confuse him. Because the clarity now lives inside, not outside. You are no longer a man who chases peace in someone else's nervous system. You are the man who carries peace within himself, immovable, untouchable. And this changes everything. Because now, when the tests come, and they always do, you don't flinch. The sudden silence doesn't trigger the old panic. The passive-aggressive comment doesn't activate the old wound. The withdrawal of affection no longer sends you spiraling into questions like, what did I do wrong? How can I fix this? How do I win her back? Instead, the only question that arises is simple, powerful. Does this energy belong in my life? And most of the time, the answer is immediate. No. No drama. No explaining. No negotiating. No rescuing. No managing someone else's chaos to maintain a false sense of connection. Just a quiet, sovereign decision. This does not match my standard. This does not match my peace. This does not belong. This is the final collapse of the old pattern. The death of the man who once believed his role was to fix, to prove, to endure. And the birth of the man who knows. I do not chase love. I attract peace. Because here's the most beautiful secret Jung's work leads to. The realization that the external always mirrors the internal. The women you once found irresistible in their chaos become invisible to you, not because they change, but because you have. Because your nervous system no longer registers their instability as familiar or as desirable. And the irony? They feel it. The women who once tested your boundaries feel the shift. They sense, consciously or unconsciously, that you are no longer a man who can be emotionally manipulated, that the buttons they used to push no longer exist, that the cracks they once slipped through are sealed, and without those access points, they lose interest, or they try harder, escalate the tests, amplify the drama, increase the emotional volatility in a desperate attempt to pull you back into the old pattern. But you don't move. You don't react. You don't engage. Because the war is over. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to fix, nothing left to decode. There is only a simple truth that lives inside you now, unshakable. My peace is non-negotiable. And in that space, something else opens, something rare, something few men ever experience until they step fully into this version of themselves. You become magnetic to an entirely different kind of woman, a woman whose nervous system is as stable as yours, a woman whose love is not conditional, a woman whose presence feels like calm, not confusion, whose affection feels like nourishment, not negotiation, whose honesty feels like safety, not threat. Because that's how the universe works. Your energy writes the invitation, and the right woman recognizes it, not because you found her, but because you finally became the man she could find. At the end of everything, after all the confusion, the chaos, the withdrawals, the second-guessing, the spirals of overthinking, there's a truth waiting for you. A truth that doesn't scream. A truth that doesn't force itself on you. It simply waits until you're ready to see it. It was never about her. It was always about you. She was a mirror, a teacher, a reflection, a living embodiment of every part of you that had not yet healed, every boundary you were afraid to set, every part of you that still believed love was something you had to earn, every crack in your self-worth, every forgotten truth about your own value. She didn't break you. She revealed the parts of you that were already broken. And as brutal as that sounds, it's not tragedy. It's opportunity. Because once you see this, once you truly understand it, you are free. You are free from the game. Free from the endless cycle of attraction to chaos. Free from the lie that intensity is the same as intimacy. Free from the addiction to being chosen by someone who only ever saw you as an emotional supplier, not as a partner. And in that freedom, you become something else entirely. A man no longer defined by the approval of others. A man who no longer sacrifices his sanity, his energy, or his soul for temporary moments of validation. A man who no longer abandons himself to avoid being abandoned by others. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the shadow, of reclaiming every exiled piece of yourself, not so you can be perfect, but so you can finally be free. Because the truth is this: the woman who triggers your wounds can never heal them, and the woman who feels like home will never trigger them in the first place. But you only meet her, the right one, when you've come home to yourself first, when your peace is no longer something you chase in others, but something you carry within. And when you do, the patterns that once ran your life collapse. The women who once destabilized you become invisible. The games you once played become boring. And the man you always were beneath the wounds finally stands tall, clear, grounded, whole. This was never about fixing her. It was always about remembering who you are. And now you know. The spell is broken. The boy is gone. The man is home.